Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to this special edition of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast, the REINS Act in focus. Joining me today is Ryan Young. We've had him on before. I've had him on the radio before. He is a senior economist with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We spoke with his colleague, Wayne Cruz. And I want to get your perspective on this. Ryan, tell us about the REINS Act, why it's important, why you think it's important, what it will do.
At heart, it's a separation of powers bill. And if there's one principle in American government, it's this: never put too much power in one place.
Right.
It's true when Democrats are in power. It's true when Republicans are in power. And we are in a situation now where no matter which party is in power, the executive branch is doing way too much legislating, and the legislative branch is doing way too little.
Right.
Regulatory agencies will issue 3,000 plus regulations every year. Congress will pass maybe 100 bills and often less.
Right.
That's a problem.
So as I think I may have said to Wayne, I know I've just been quoting this. One of my North Stars in policy is a quote from a 1992 Supreme Court case, New York versus United States. The Constitution protects us from our own best intentions. It divides power among sovereigns and among branches of government precisely so that we might resist the temptation to concentrate power in one location as the expedient solution to the crisis of the day. The Constitution is a document about deliberation. It's about separation of powers. It serves to protect individual rights. This is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Exactly. And as far as separation of powers reforms go, REINS is actually pretty modest.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's had as much of a fight as it's had, but it's
Right.
passed the House. It's been introduced and reintroduced for probably 2 decades at this point. Right now might be the most promising moment it's had in a really long time. It might be in the reconciliation bill that has an unofficial July 4 deadline. And we're hoping, and it's been added to the bill, taken out, been through a few rounds of that, probably go through a few more rounds. But we're hoping it'll get added in. And what this would do is then Congress would actually have to vote.
Right.
Major new agency regulations. That'd probably be about 4 dozen extra votes on the congressional calendar. Not a big ask, but as far as reforming the separation of powers, it'd be a huge help.
So let's talk about this because, and it's a two-part question, really. Well, this being the first part. Why we saw this in the wake of the Loper-Bright decision last year, overturning the Chevron doctrine, which, you had some members of Congress who were very upset about this and wanted to push the power back into the executive branch. Why are some members of Congress so reluctant to take this power that is rightfully theirs within the Constitution? Why are they so reluctant to take it back, do you think?
Part of it's blame avoidance.
Yeah.
If the executive does something that turns out to be unpopular, a member of Congress can go back to their district, and if a town meeting gets hostile, they can just say, "Don't blame me. It's all on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue." So that's one reason. Another is, frankly, a lot of people view it as a deregulatory tool, which it often is. But
Right.
keep in mind, one of my cardinal principles is don't give yourself powers you don't want the other side to have.
Right.
And the REINS Act is a double-edged sword. If I'm a Democrat, I might like the REINS Act because it can help me push back against the Trump administration. And if a Democrat's in power and I'm a Republican, vice versa. It's a double-edged sword. It's more about accountability and separation of powers rather than this partisan political moment.
Right. This gets into what I was talking about with, I did an op-ed many, many years ago with Jerry Rogers, former CEI alumnus as well, about that very issue, about the idea of if you're concerned about executive power being in the wrong hands, now is the time to take care of that and deal with it. I mean, this is certainly the issue right now. Again, it gets back to the Loper, Bright, and Relentless decisions, right? If you're concerned about your opponents, your political opponents, I'm not going to say enemies. Our good old friend and mentor Fred Smith was always not a fan of putting it in those terms. But your opponents on these issues, right? You should want this. You should want this kind of taking back a power. Actually, let's go here, Ryan, because you guys do great work at CEI in terms of the quantification. Wayne and I talked about sort of the differences. Have you guys done a calculation of the regulatory cost savings that could have been had we had the REINS Act, 12 years ago when it was first introduced? Have you guys looked at that, or do you have any sort of general ideas about this?
No, and it's hard to say because, frankly, the REINS Act could end up being a rubber stamp, depending
Right,
on, whenever Congress is in the same party as the presidency, you're probably going to have some rubber stamping going on, where you have not a separation of powers, split of power.
right,
Uh, then it might be a different dynamic. And of course, cost estimates themselves, as you and Wayne may have well talked about, these are always problematic because
right.
the assumptions are arbitrary and they make all kinds of funny business to make the rules appear
Yes.
better than they actually are. So I'd be curious about that myself.
Something real quick, let's talk a little bit about that. Wayne and I talked about this. One of my big issues has been the change in the metrics by which we assess the cost and benefits of regulation. The previous administration went through and created a new set of metrics that vastly overstate the benefits while minimizing the rules. Wayne is of the opinion, and maybe we start here. Wayne is of the opinion that some folks just they're not interested, or more to the point, they don't think that there are costs to regulation because that's just the way it is. Do you share this perspective? Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, you're talking about trade-offs,
Right,
which I mean, Thomas Sowell says that the first lesson of economics is scarcity.
right,
There's never enough of everything that everyone wants. Scarcity exists.
right,
The first lesson of politics is to ignore the first lesson of economics.
right,
And that's exactly what we're seeing in regulation. What the Biden administration did with its reformulating of cost benefit procedures is it actually tasked the people in OIRA, the agency that does the calculating, to stop giving objective analysis and instead justify the
right.
regulation. So instead of doing analysis, they're doing cheerleading. The Trump administration rolled that back. It was done through executive order, which means it could be overturned. So hopefully Congress steps up and legislates those reforms to make them permanent. But yeah, that is not healthy at all. We need good data. Otherwise, you have a garbage in, garbage out problem.
Right. It would be we becomes no different than the Stalin 5-year plans, where they were constantly revising the data. Not that we haven't seen, administrations revise on a month-to-month basis economic data that's out there. But I guess, as I think about this, we could theoretically. I'm not a trained economist, not the senior economist at CEI, but I mean theoretically we could take a range, right? If we sort of assess all of the major rules over the last 12 years, and sort of say, okay, if all of these were overturned or not passed by Congress because of the REINS Act, versus if none of them were, right, we could theoretically create a range of savings, couldn't we? Theoretically?
Yeah, and I do calculate that. I do a weekly roundup for CEI, and as the
You
year
do.
goes by, I evaluate the totals. In an average year, we'll see between 10 and $20 billion worth of those economically significant regulations that would be vulnerable to a REINS Act challenge.
Right.
So you just to do back of the envelope, multiply that by 12, you're talking 10 to $20 billion, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah,
So
per
it's
per year.
it's not yeah, per
Yeah.
year. And it's not it's not anything that's going to erase the deficit or change a faltering economy into a booming economy. But it's not nothing either, and you got to start somewhere.
Well, right, but on the other hand, as I talk about, we have data, and Wayne and I were talking about yesterday the issue of opportunity costs. I mean, this is part of the problem, as Wayne and I were talking about. Part of the problem is we don't know what we don't know. We could sort of make estimates about opportunity costs, but let's assume for a moment that it's not the $19 number that I've been talking about for a while. Let's assume that it's a half that or a third of that. So 6 times to 10 times the opportunity cost, in terms of the economy. I mean, $20 billion a year becomes $120 billion to 400 billion. I mean, anyway, you can never do math on the air, Ryan, by the way. That's if you didn't know that. But I mean that, pretty soon you are talking about real money, aren't you?
Yeah, and it really adds up. I think you and I have talked before about that famous study by Dawson and Cedar,
Dawson and
which
Cedar.
takes into account compound interest. And as
Right.
Einstein said, it's the most powerful force in the universe.
It really is. I don't,
That is an opportunity cost.
you and I have not talked since I have a child who's graduated from college, is now in the workforce, and talking about the power of compound interest. And I ran the math for her on what happens if she saves X numbers of dollars a month over the course of X number of years, and she was blown away by this. Um, so what are we hoping for? I mean, we're hoping that it gets added in on the Senate side. Wayne was talking about, I don't know if you talked to him about this, but this strategy to get a really good way of looking at it, add it back into the Senate bill. I mean, are you seeing the same thing? What would you like to see at the end of the day?
I would like to see Lucy hang on to the football so that Charlie Brown can finally kick it.
Sure.
And I have no idea what's going to happen politically. That's all behind, those smoky
Right.
backroom closed doors. But what I really hope is not only that it gets through, but that it builds a habit for Congress to start acting. We've seen in both Trump administrations some positive regulatory reforms on
Right.
guidance documents, regulatory budgets, the one in, two out, and then the one in, 10 out.
Right.
All those can go away the instant there's a change of power because they're only executive orders, which can be overturned. Congress needs to build the habit, and I think the REINS Act would be a great place to start.
Right, right. And as you said, I just want to stick a fine point on it. This is something that Democrats should want to get behind because it reigns in power for presidents that you may not agree with. Just real quick, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's not Republican Democrat stuff. It's a separation of powers issue. And one of the things that frustrates me about Washington is that everyone tends to see every issue as in they pick a side, first
Right,
of all, which is a problem. And then they view everything through the lens of my side, their side. Everything's got to be us and them. Government at its best doesn't work that way.
right.
Government at its best would be much smaller.
Sure.
But also be more about those ideals like the separation of powers, more about enabling people to create opportunities and create innovations, as opposed to trying to micromanage everything, not only just for its own sake, but also to reward my friends and punish my enemies, because they have to us and them it, and the real world doesn't work that way.
Well, Ryan, remind us all how folks can find out more about the good work that you're doing, and also, please, you got to plug your Twitter handle because I didn't do that at the top of the 15 minutes. So, but please.
Yeah, the Competitive Enterprise Institute's website is cei.org. You can find all of our research there on all kinds of regulatory issues, and my Twitter handle is at Reg of the Day.
At Reg of the Day on Twitter, also CEI.org spelled out, CEIDOTORG. On X, you can find out the good work that they're doing. Ryan Young, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
My guest has been Ryan Young. He's the senior economist with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI.org. As we've said, this is a special series from the Lunch Hour, the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour, REINS Act in Focus. Stay tuned. 25 episodes on the REINS Act over the next 10 days. So check that out. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.